ghost hovered a few meters above the small campfire and tried, again, to explain. The library chewed on a bit of tough flavors. He had softened it over the fire as approaching fire. To his surprise, they found themselves enjoying it. He interrupted his ghost. You've explained how it's supposed to be, and I've explained that I don't care, he said with a playful finality. I don't like any of the names you suggested, and either we both get new names, or neither of us do. Rose flew down high, where a shadow waited and was destined to break up in the fire. I have had several good names already, I enjoyed some quite a bit. Lightbearer shook his head. You said I had a name before as well. You won't tell me who that was. Can't, the Lightbearer fell silent. The ghost emitted a stomach sigh. Purely as if he had left himself irritated. What would you? Why? It's in the darkness. The Lightbearer began. Lost. His stomach was it is almost unbearably it nourished him with its encouragement and its ignorance. According to the sometimes anxiety in his belly. The ghost would rest on his chest and hum to him until he fell back to sleep. The Lightbearer took a breath to regain his composure, and thus I named thee Sparky. The ghost emitted a pained groan, contracted in the air, and fell to the ground, where it lay face down in the leaf litter. The Lightbearer smiled. I'm sensing some reluctance, Sparky. The ghost gave the bearer's pulse and rolled his head over the leaves, a tiny, lazy movement. It dimmed its light to a bare flicker. It's terrible, it said flatly. Picky, the Lightbearer sniffed. Well, very well, I can do better. The ghost wearily resumed hovering. How do you feel about gleam? He asked. Flash? Or maybe glint? Glint? A rainbow of colors played across the ghost's eye. This usually meant he was calculating complex enemy behavior, determining combat outcomes, or mapping hundreds of bullets and their millions of possible trajectories. Ooh, I like glint. The Lightbearer drew to his feet by the fire and bowed deeply. Then it's an honor to meet you, Master Glint. He reached out a finger and wiggled one of the glint's points in greeting. The absurdity of the gesture delighted the little ghost. And now that you have a name, said the Lightbearer, perhaps I can be more open to ideas as we search for mine. Glint dipped in the air, acknowledging his partner's progress. The pair smothered the fire earlier than usual that night. The next morning, a passerby saw Glint's Lightbearer without his helmet. The Titan beat him mercilessly with her flaming hammer, snapping his collarbone and crushing his pelvis. He died hours later of internal hemorrhage. Glint brought him back, and the pair traveled in silence for a long time. The pipes rattled their a rhythmic beat as they greeted a new arrival in the spider's lair. He entered their hesitance. Gold eyes flitted around the room like a nervous animal. His clothes were those of a trader. The white shawl of a funerary covering draped across his shoulders that hunched downward as if a heavy burden rested on them. He was thin from hunger, broken by the cruelty of a face he did not recognize. But others reveled. Out of compassion, he was given a space to rest, a modicum of privacy amid the rattling pipes. The spider, with one hand at his mouth, perched so far forward on his throne that it dipped down towards the floor. "Nothing?" he asked one of his lieutenants, who offered a wordless shake of his head in response. "And you're sure? This isn't just some..." Spider waved one hand in the air, as if gesturing to his point. "Some clever ruse?" The silence had Spider was met with was as well have been a resounding affirmative. "Fascinating," the spider grunted as he slid forward off his throne. He landed on the floor with a surprising grace, but when he walked, it was with an abbling gait, a faint weakness. He dismissed his lieutenant with a flippant gesture and traipsed forward the nearby storage room. The pipes were quieter in there, but only just. Seated on the floor, wrapped in the tattered white cloth of his burial shroud, the man once known as Prince Aldrin Sov looked up to the wide shadow spider cast in the doorway. He rose to his feet, then bowed. "Baron," he said mistakenly, unaware the spider neither held no such a title, nor led a great house. Spider's response was a smug laugh, though he tried to temper it behind smiling words. "You look like the underside of a drag's boot," Spider opened, as he glided into the room with a silence that belied his stooped posture and uneven gait. His guest, a light bearer no less, turned to his ghost in a moment of uncertainty. "We had better days," was the ghost's response. Spider restrained himself from criticizing the ghost for intruding on the conversation, and pointedly ignored him. My boys said they found you adrift in space, that your ship ran into some debris," Spider said. "Awful generous of them to retrieve you." The spider circled, slowly, blue eyes glowing in the gloom of the dimly lit space. Up close, he carefully assessed the light bearer's posture, his expressions, and even something as intimate and subtle as his scent. "How long were you trapped up there, in the vacuum, dying and being reborn, over and over again?" The light bearer slouched, and his gold eyes averted to the floor at the memory. "Long enough to know what eternity feels like. Long enough to know I'd never escape without..." He looked up to Spider, to the glow of those ether-infused eyes. "Without help." "That's me," Spider said eagerly. Very helpful indeed." Not sure what the light bearers didn't recognize him. The spider ambled up close to look an incessant look at his new guest. "I don't think I caught your name," he added. "One final test." The light bearer didn't know how to answer. His ghost was silent too. "I don't have one." It took all of Spider's energy not to burst out in a gleeful laughter. "Well, that won't do," Spider insisted as he laid a hand on the light bearer's shoulder. "That won't do at all. I won't have someone in my care," and Spider was careful to emphasize that word, "without a proper name." With a slight tone, Spider moved in closer and suggested, "How about we try one out? Just for a little while, you and me." His voice lowered, gravelly and hushed. "What do you think about Crow?" The light bearer's eyes showed no recognition. The spider's shone with predatory intent. The warlock could handle the war beasts. The Cabal legionaries were slow enough that she could thin their numbers in the open. Even the massive Centurion wouldn't be an issue once it was alone. But there were 3 Phocians up in the ridge with their rifles trained on her position, and if she moved from behind her boulder, she was finished. Druce knelt in the coarse red sand and cursed under her breath. She hadn't expected this much opposition. She didn't have the energy to teleport. Getting out of this was going to be painful. She took a deep breath from the rolling void grenade in her hand, and an explosion erupted from somewhere on the ridge. Gunshots. Not the ozone pop of Cabal slug rifles, but the sweet crack of old-fashioned black powder. The Centurion barked orders at the legionaries, but panic quickly won over the commands. Crews heard their guttural cries as something picked them off. Another explosion, and the bearing war beasts fell quiet. The gunfire drew closer. The Centurion bellowed, and then nothing. Druce cautiously poked her head out from behind the boulder. The Cabal squad lay in heads around the gully. Remnants of Phocians littered the ridge. The air was heavy with the thick smoke and the smell of black oil. In the midst of the carnage, a lone hunter holstered his weapon and stepped over a corpse. He walked with tight efficiency, no movement wasted. He was graceful, even for a hunter. Druce stepped into the open and raised a hand in greeting. "Hi, Guardian," she called. "Appreciate your handiwork. The name's Druce, and you just saved me a whole lot of trouble." The hunter's expression was hidden by his heavy helmet. He gave a perfunctory wave and knelt to examine the Centurion's weapon. Now that she was standing, Druce realized she was a full head taller than the hunter. Suppose everyone seems tall when you're cowering behind a rock, she thought. She pulled off her helmet and let the fresh air cool her slate-blue skin. Her dark hair limply unfurled from where it was piled atop of her head. She fixed the hunter with her golden eyes and smiled. "I signed up for a simple salvage run," she said. "Transmit some supplies, run into the city. I've had a headache all morning and didn't want anything loud." The hunter nodded without looking up and pulled a sparking catalyst from a slug rifle. Druce chuckled. "It's okay," she said, nudging the body of a fallen legionary with her boot. "You don't have to talk when you can shoot like that." The hunter paused, then stood and faced her. They call me Crow," he said, "and I'm glad I could be of some help." The hunter's voice was soft and refined, but it also had a frosty edge. It was not unfriendly. "Not as glad as I am," Druce said. "The last thing I needed today was to take a rest with this headache. I told the Cabal that, but they wouldn't listen. Rude of them." Crow laughed politely. "That I can understand. After being brought back, I feel all sorts of hours." He turned to look for more Cabal weapons, and something caught the warlock's eye. She whooped. The hunter looked up, ready. "I'll be damned!" cried Cruz, pointing to his arm. "You're Reefborn, aren't you? Earthborn here, but you and me, we still go a way back." Crow looked down. A strip of leather had been torn from his gauntlet, and beneath this, his own grey-blue, awoken skin could clearly be seen. When she looked up, Druce had nearly closed the distance between them. In a few long strides, his hand hovered over his weapon before the warlock clopped in on the back. "Figured you for one. It was your voice and the way you move," the tall woman playfully juked from side to side. Crow was quiet. Druce wished you could see the helmeted hunter's expression. To her relief, There was a beep from the tracker on their belt. "Finally, some good news," she said. "We're right on top of the supply coordinates." She scanned the area and located the tiny supply ship half hidden by a rock slide. "Since you kept this cargo out of the hands of the Cabal, I'd say you're entitled to a cut." "That won't be necessary," Crow said. He shifted his weight and hid his exposed arm behind his back. It was the first awkward movement Jules had seen him make. "I didn't say it was necessary," she replied. "Just a kindness between two bright-eyed Awoken. Won't be a minute." She ducked into the sand-filled hold of the tiny ship and found the shipping crates. Dim red lights blinked on their panels. The seals had broken long ago. She pried the lid off of the closest one. Inside the grim-covered bottles, the liquid still shone with a gentle orange glow. She uncorked one, wiped the neck clean against her vestments, and took a sip. It was bright with honey and salt and burned her throat with a clean, gingerly sweetness. "We're in luck," Jules called as she hopped outside with the bottle. But the hunter was gone. Jules placed the bottle on a flat stone and took a seat next to it. Though she did not expect her companion to return, she waited, busying herself by picking dried blood from the velvety hem of her garment. Finally, she sighed, slapped her palms on her thighs, and reached for a drink. To Crow, she shrugged. He wasn't afraid of the scorn at first. Like anyone else who could spare the bullets, Crow had picked off a few dozen at distance when he found them in the open. Flint told him they were related to Elixni somehow, which made sense. They moved like Elixni, but they didn't just stay dead. When the raiding party hit one of the Baron's storehouses, he immediately sent Crow after them. He said the Scorn were bad for business. Crow would tell by his benefactor's wet wheezing he wanted revenge. Crow was stealthy, careful, but the Scorn could smell, or sense, or something. He was forced to move deeper into the territory, picking his way through the welded-together ship husks as the creature searched for him. They had herded him into a kill box, the derelict ship with one way out. Then they started coming inside. The Crown found he much preferred fighting them from 100 yards away. The Scorn were rotting flesh pressed tight beneath metal, their bodies webbed with scars and fields of boils, malformed flaps of muscle bolted crudely into place, clumps of brown cloth battered into weeping sockets. Crowley loaded his revolver and dropped 3 of the smaller ones. Their helmets were thinner, or the bronze structure softer. Either way, one shot was all it took. The air was filled with the sour smell of wounds festering beneath brass. Chains dragged against the metal to his left, and Crow spun. A hulking form was pulling its way through a gap in the ship's hull. Crow fired. Some of the blue pustules that ringed the creature's shoulders burst open. A thin gas rose from the wound and released an acrid smell of cold solvent. He unloaded into the thing's body, corking the tunnel with his corpse. 2 stalkers pressed through another gap and moved to flank him. He backpedaled and reloaded, fully aware he was being pushed farther into the corridors of the ship. He turned in time to catch sight of a flaming thurible and ducked, but it collided with the side of his head. His ears rang, and his revolver clattered to the floor. The stalkers hooted in excitement as something tackled him. It was one of the big raiders, its 4 ropey arms bound with filthy belts. He struggled and felt the leather straps along its forearms twist and crunch. They were caked with dried lymph. The raider was on top of him, mouth howling below his featureless metal faceplate, pinning him to the ground with its larger arms, while the smaller two tried to bring its rifle up for a shot. A jagged claw tore through Crow's cheek as he writhed and kicked in the raider's grasp. He wrestled the rifle away from his chin and forced it into the direction of the two stalkers. He groped blindly until his fingers found the trigger. The burst of fire hit the stalkers, and they fell in a screeching heap. The raider roared and twisted the rifle from Crow's grip and flung it away. He freed up the weapon. Its frenzied subarms tore at the Crow's stomach. He felt claws catch and tear his own leathers, and then they were through, and his waist was slick with blood. Gibbering madly, it pulled him closer to its misshapen teeth. Thin mucus poured from somewhere under the metal faceplate, down through the thing's lipless, chittering mouth, down into Crow's face. And then he realized that the creature was speaking. It was a long moment of horror, followed by one of the pure revulsion. It was one thing to be torn apart by a mindless creature of madness, but this would not be allowed. Crow felt the light surrounding him more solidly than the arms of the raider. He kicked up the creature as if under water and felt his torn stomach lurch. The raider's arms closed on nothing. He looked up in rage as Crow's shifting form tumbled away. With one hand down on the rusty deck of the craft, Crow steadied himself. The light rose from a body like steam. Knife, he thought, and some of the dissipating energy became a blade in his hand. He stood. The raider charged forward, clawed hands clattering against the ground as it skidded towards him. Crow feinted left and pulled his arm across his body, then pivoted and dropped to a knee as he let the knife go. The blade was in creature's chest, and the blade was light, and the creature became flame. The smoke was pure, the ash clean. The light was Crow's weapon. As he walked out of the ship, it was the light that roared again and again and again from his hand. It was the light that grew glint and Crow as he walked like a pillar of flame in the night. And it was the light that kept Crow from madness, even as the voice of the thing echoed through his mind. Father, 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 Father. Glint checked his coordinates again and entered Spider's subterranean shipping depot. He bobbed uncertainly through the tight towers of stacked crates, beneath hanging coils of gurgling tubing, over piles of crushed face glass, and through a hissing vent of rich lavender smoke that obscured what looked like a quantilope opal, but was bright no worship as such an unstable isotope was utterly forbidden. Glint decided it must be a replica. He found Spider working a bank of consoles in the nexus of the depot. An intricate series of gravity currents filled the air with gently gliding cargo. Rusty iris gates snapped open and shut as Spider directed his goods to unseen corners of his dominion. "Tell me about Crow," Spider said without looking up. Glint flew closer and caught sight of himself on a small monitor. He saw a mosaic of security feeds, corridors of the Tangled shore, a strange workshop, Crow's quarters, before Spider collapsed the images and turned to address him directly. "How has our friend been performing in the field?" "Quite well," Glint answered. "He's fully more confident now." "Good," said Smiler dismissively. He plucked a cracked chunk of seraphite from the current of air as it passed, ran his claws over it, then placed it back in the beam. Has anyone told him? Clint didn't have to ask for clarification. Not outright. He knows he wasn't a good person. He gathered that much from the Guardians who killed him. But he hasn't heard his old name. Spider gave a phlegmy grunt of contentment. And there haven't been any indiscretions? Clint's eye flickered, and he made almost imperceptible processing noise. Spider leaned forward. Do you have something to tell me? It's actually a funny story, Clint said. We ran across a warlock who recognized him as an Awoken, and he was seen? Spider shouted, striking in the side of the passing crate. A roar of mewling squeaks rose from within. Clint watched as he floated out of sight. Not seen, Clint had said. She noticed his skin under his gauntlet. He told me he didn't want to risk further exposure, so he left. Then he's lying, Clint, even to you. The light in Spider's eyes seemed to dull. One of his smaller arms scratched irritably at his side. It's only a matter of time, Clint said softly. People talk behind his back. There are rumors someone named Shalko has been following him. He's heard the Scorn call him Father. He'll eventually figure it out. I gave him rules for a reason. Following the rules is counter to his nature, Clint said blithely. Then noticed Spider's scowl. Frustrating, I know. He could ask anything of the next Guardian he sees, and I couldn't stop him. Spider growled. You will stop him. The thing is, said Clint, someday he realized who he was doesn't matter. What's important is who he is. Who he is, Spider hissed, is my investment. I'm counting on you to remind him of that fact. A damaged crate floated past, loose glimmers swirling in the gravity beam behind it. The little ghost was quiet. He floated unsteadily for a moment, then rose to Spider's eye level. Baron Spider, Clint said respectfully. In his short new life, Crow has faced more than his share of cruelty. He learned what it is to truly suffer. Clint mistook Spider's contempt for contemplation and continued. He isn't afraid of being hurt anymore. If you want him to stay, he said helpfully, you need to offer him more than threats. Spider looked at the impotent little orb, and rage welled up inside him. But he was old, and he was smart. He let anger flow over him, around him, floated in its black waters, until only his eyes were left peering over the surface. Thank you, Clint, he said, his voice calm. I will call for you again if I need you. Clint beeped with pride, dipped in the air respectfully, and sipped away through the staffs of contraband. The ether pipes were howling. Spider sat hunched to one of his throne, head in hand, when Crow returned from the field. Baron, Crow addressed his ostensible benefactor. The Spider looked up and wordlessly beckoned the light bearer over. Upon reaching the throne, Crow took a knee. What was it we talked about before you left? Spider's theoretical question sat like a weight of stones on Crow's shoulders. Crow didn't look up, and when he started to answer, Spider cut him off. Guardians can't be trusted, was Spider's reminder. They can be useful, they can be powerful, but never trusted. Baron, I only thought you... No, the Spider bellowed. You didn't. If you thought about anything, you wouldn't have exposed. Spider caught himself, words returning into a snarl grumble as he laid back in his throne. You screwed up. Crow, head bowed and eyes fixed on the floor, said nothing. He knew the Spider's anger, knew his displeasure. and knew his wrath. He held no desire to face it again. But maybe there is some, the spider hesitated and chose his words carefully, wisdom in our defiance. The guardians are too good of a resource to cast aside, especially on matters beyond our mutual expertise. It was only then that Crow looked up questioningly. For a moment, he felt humbled pride. Perhaps, he believed, that act of defiance had broken through the spider, revealed Crow as more than a convenient light-bearer. The spider held out one hand. "I have an idea to protect you." His offer sounded sincere, even if the spider meant his investment and not Crow as a person. "Send Glint over." Crow grew tense, looked away, and then thought of better testing another act of defiance so soon. With a nod, he showed his compliance as Glint manifested at his side. The ghost fixed on Crow with a nervous look, then flew up the spider. "What do you require?" Glint asked. Instead of answering, the spider snatched Glint out of the air with one hand. Glint shrieked and Crow stood swiftly, but just as swiftly saw the arch spikes of Spider's guards thrust at him. Spider made a clicking noise in the back of his throat and reached for a set of tools nearby. Tools used to pry open the shells of dead ghosts. They would work on living ones just as well. "What are you doing?" Glint demanded, fear in his voice. Crow stood frozen, having faced Spider's punishments before. But this was his ghost. A part of Crow also feared that perhaps he was misreading the situation. He was so certain that Spider would never do anything to permanently hurt him. But when the spider shook Glint into paralysis with a small needle tool, Crow was disabused of that certainty. "Stop!" Crow cried as Spider wedged a flat tool between Glint's shell plates. "No!" With a snap, the spider popped one of the casings off. Then he looked up to Crow and switched tools. "Don't worry," the spider said in soothing reassurance that flowed like ice through Crow's veins. "I'm just going to make some modifications," he said, igniting a cutting torch, "to better protect you from the world." Glint's shell showed the scars of spider implements. "I'm so sorry." Crow's voice was barely a whisper. For all his strength as a light bearer, he looked at the small seated on the floor on his den, illuminated by the pale glow of a solitary lamp. Crow cradled Glint in his cupped hand. The ghost's monocular eye stared up at him and flicked weakly. "I'm so sorry." "It's all right." Glint couldn't blame Crow. I think I'll be fine. The spider is," he had to cautiously choose his next words, "very skilled with modifying ghost architecture." "He put a bomb inside you," Crow hissed, his voice cracking. "But I'm still here. Still with you," Glint reassured. "And you still have the light. That's what matters." Crow looked up at the ceiling, unable to bear the sight of the damage done to his ghost. He was silent. The room was silent, save from the damnable rattling of those pipes. "I'll put you in this position," Crow said quietly. "I'll let this happen. You had no choice. You can't change the past," Glint said as he floated up out of Crow's hands, a little crookedly, like a bird with an injured wing. "We can only look to the future." Crow forced himself to gaze down into Glint's single flickering eye. "My future is with you. You're all I have. The only person who... He lowered his voice, afraid Spider might overhear them. The only person who cares about me. You won't ever know who cares about you until you meet them, Glint contested, then floated closer to Crow's face. You aren't a prisoner, he added. You could live a normal life, without the light. Crow's jaw tensed, teeth clenched together. No, he said through them. I won't abandon you. You would never do that to me. The ghost looked away in thought for a moment, then bobbed up and down. You're right, he said as he turned again to face his light bearer. Glint floated in and softly tapped his shell to Crow's nose. I'll never leave you. Crow reached out and gently took Glint to the palm of his hand. We're all we have, Crow whispered, pulling his knees in close, and Glint even closer. The spider will never let us go, but at least we have each other.